Strike Force 1 is a game that was published way back then, specifically as a tool. Not so much, at least not only as a game, but as a way to introduce new players to wargaming. So it is a game that introduces concepts such as zone control, attacks, stacking, to people that may not have seen them in other games. It is such a basic and linear game that indeed it does feel like a pedagogical tool more than it feels like a game, but it does have the advantage being so simple that not only can you play it with non-wargamers, but I think it is even going to be accessible. It is even accessible to non-gamers, to people that never moved past a Monopoly, or to very young gamers that never played many games to start with because maybe they're 5 or 6. Strike Force 1, as for the topic, it represents an hypothetical confrontation, hypothetical battle between American and Soviet forces in Germany during the Cold War. So it is an hypothetical conflict which even adds to the abstract dimension of the game, which is already abstract enough. Why did I decide to pick up this game? Not because I wanted to be introduced to wargaming, that happened some time ago already, but because I wanted to have an extra tool for a class that I'm going to be teaching in the second part of this semester. I'm teaching a class at IU about representations of war in fiction. So we're going to read war literature, we're going to watch movies, and I hope we're going to be playing some war games. So at least I'm going to introduce the students to another way of representing war. And yes, I cannot count on a class being populated by gamers only. Well, not by wargamers, not by gamers only. Most likely most people will not be gamers of any kind, so I was looking for a game that could be approachable to them. I played Strike Force 1, trying to see if it could work in my class. I'm going to show you how the game works, and then I'm going to tell a little bit about the game in general and whether or not I'm going to include it in my upcoming class. The game is played on this map, which is printed on cardboard, and here you see the setup for the game. The Soviets have 6 units at the beginning, the Americans have 4. The Soviets need to move towards the area that is being guarded by the Americans, and the Soviets are trying to take control of at least 2 of these 3 hexes, which represent towns. If the Soviets physically occupy at least 2 of these hexes at the end of the game, they win the game. Otherwise, the Americans win the game. And the game will only last 4 turns. Each turn, the Soviets move first, then they can attack with units that they have adjacent to enemy units, and then the Americans do the same. Movement and optional attacks with units adjacent to enemy units. All units can move up to 4 hexes, and they can only move in clear terrain. Forest hexes are impassable. Well, clear and also towns. So units can move, and they move up to 4 hexes. They have 4 movement points. 1, 2, 3, 4. You have to stop when you enter an X adjacent to an enemy unit. So that means that all units project the zone of control in the passable hexes around them. You can, if you're in an enemy zone of control, move away from it next turn, but you cannot enter an X which is in another unit's, another enemy unit's zone of control. So if I'm here, or actually you also cannot move in a zone of control of the unit that is projecting the one in which you are. So you cannot move from zone of control to zone of control directly. If I'm there, I cannot move there because I'm in another area that is in a zone of control. I could not move there. This is impassable, so I could only move there. This is very important for retreat purposes, because if you surround an opponent and you force it to retreat, the opponent cannot move into a zone of control, and if that is the only viable option, that means that there are no viable options, and the enemy unit that is retreating is eliminated. After movement, as I said, you may have combat. Combat in the basic game is simply based on the number of units that are attacking an opponent. Suppose that this is the situation, for example. The Soviets could choose to attack with these 2 units, they could attack that unit, they could attack with these 2 units, these units. You can have multiple units attacking into a single hex. They can gang up against a single defender. All units can attack only once or defend only once per turn, per combat phase. To resolve combat, you look at this table, you simply look at the column that represents the number of units that are attacking. 2 units here, for example, would use this column here. You roll a d6, there are no modifiers, and you simply cross-reference the column that you're using with the result of the die, and you apply the results, which can be defender retreats or attacker retreats. It can also be that the attacker is eliminated or the defender is eliminated. And if the defender has nowhere to go and forced to retreat, for example, the defender can only enter impassable access or zones of control, the defender is eliminated. If the defender has vacated the X of the attack, either because the defender was eliminated or retreated or eliminated while retreating, the attacker can advance after combat. If the attacker was eliminated or retreated, the defender cannot advance. Advance after combat only is an option for the attacker. And then you have the advanced game once you mastered the basic game and pretty much explained all that matters in the basic game. So as for the advanced game, the general idea is the same. Soviets move and attack, then Americans move and attack. The Americans are trying to defend the towns, the Soviets are trying to take 2 of them. The main differences are that now there is stacking allowed. In the basic game you can only have a unit per hex. In the advanced game you can have up to 2 units per hex, and they can move as a stack, and they can add together their strength as they're attacking. If there's a situation that would be pretty dire for the Americans, because that would be 4 units attacking a single American unit. As you can see, being surrounded is something you really want to avoid in this game. Also, forest hexes are now playable in the advanced game, and it costs 2 movement points to enter them. Also, they give defensive advantages to the defender. If a unit is in a forest hex, or if a stack is in a forest hex, it counts as if there is an extra unit there for defense purposes. So 2 units defending in a stack count as 3 defending units. In the advanced game, the number of units that are defending in a stack also matters, because now combat is based not just on the number of attacking units, but on the combat differential between the strength of the attacking units, that would be the number of attacking units, and the strength of the defending units based on the number of defending units plus terrain. So you total the combat factor of the attacker. Suppose we have 1, 2, 3 units of the attacker. Well, let's make it a big attack. 5 units of the attacker. They're attacking against 2 enemies plus 1 because there is terrain there, so it's 5 minus 3. You compute the differential by subtracting the strength of the defender from that of the attacker. You look at the column with the combat differential that applies. Combat differential with less than 0 means that the attack cannot be resolved, so you cannot attack if you do not have at least the same number of units of the defender. You have your combat differential, you roll the die, and you apply the result. The result are now slightly different, because yes, you can still have defender retreats, attacker retreats, defender eliminated, attacker eliminated, but you also have a result of exchange, which means that both the attacker and the defender lose a unit. And yeah, you have a little terrain chart that tells you what happens there. Movement cost, advantage for the defender, zone of control, stops movement, unit may attack, but it blocks retreat. This game is so simple, so basic, especially in its basic form, that really feels much more like an exercise, almost I would say homework, than it feels like a game. Mind you, there are decisions that you have to make, and some are even, I would say, mildly interesting. For the Americans, for example, there are some dilemmas to face. The Americans can choose to hold the cities, and in which case it is easy for the Soviets to surround them and to destroy them, especially as they force the Americans to retreat into enemy zones of control. Or the Americans can try to move around and maneuver, but to do so they will probably need to vacate at least some of the cities. Then they may try to retake later. The Americans have the more creative side to play. For the Soviets, it is about grabbing those cities, those towns as fast as possible. But the game is so short that even if there are potential interesting situations, it never you never get the time for the situation to build up to the point in which it gets, I wouldn't say epic, but I would say truly interesting or truly exciting. It is a basic game that does show you, however, what it means to show you. That is, some basic mechanics, and yes, even some basic choices. For example, the choice between a static defense and a mobile defense, and even the idea of counterattacks, if that is something that the American player can pull off. So very basic, but there is some word game flavor in there. With the advanced game, you also have stacking, you also have terrain. It feels a little bit more like a word game. It is not a game that you will pull out of the shelf if you're a word gamer just to have fun with it, not even as a light diversion, not even as a filler. Even for that category, there are other light games that double well as both pedagogical tools and good games. Battle for Moscow being one such game. This one is really, and I would say almost exclusively, a pedagogical tool. And because of this, however, it can have a place in your collection because it can indeed be useful. This is indeed a game that I will show to my students and we will play it in my class. I believe that indeed we can play it in the class. I can play with complete non-gamers. The rules are so simple. The game being so fast, on one hand, it never gets truly exciting, not very much at least, because as soon as you start getting excited, the game is over, and a die roll will simply make one of the two sides gain so much advantage that the game will be over. So, even if the game is so short and it's not that excited, on the other hand, it can work well in the classroom, in which I have a limited amount of time. I can ask the students to read the rules in advance, then we can play it in class, and they can, for example, work in pairs and play a game, and then shift sides to see the situation from the other side and play another game. Being so short, I will be able to have my students play it in the classroom more than once in a single class, and probably even with time at the end for discussion, exchanging ideas. So I think that this is a game that can have a lot of uses, not just to play it with your seasoned Wargamers friend or even with your seasoned gamers friend, but keep it in mind as an option. If there is a very young gamer that you know and you want to introduce them to wargaming, if there's a non-gamer you want to introduce them to gaming, this is a possibility. I think that next year, my 4-year-old, she'll be 5, could play this. I think that she could grasp at least the basic game, and probably after a couple of games, even the advanced game. I don't know if she'll like it because the components are not as colorful and attractive as the components that that children's games usually have. Maybe I will retheme it with bunnies and stuff like that. It may seem like a small thing, but the visual aspect is very important for children. Heck, it is still very important for adults. You can imagine for a 5-year-old. Apart from this, that she may be a little turned off by the way the game looks, I think that she may enjoy it. Definitely she will get it. I think it's not too complex even for a child that young. So Strike Force 1, not a great game per se, not even that much of a game per se, but a useful tool that I think can have many uses. And if you think you need a tool such as this one, as I said earlier, keep this one in mind. Strike Force 1 can be an option.